Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a good time for DockerCon. How are you doing, Felipe?
Hi, I'm great.
So let's get started. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Guillaume Tardif. I'm a staff engineer at Docker, and I've been working on Docker extensions for the past few months.
Hi, everyone. My name is Felipe Cruz. I'm a software engineer at Docker, and I have been also working with Docker extensions.
So we are really glad to show today how you can create new Docker extensions and create your own Docker extensions. Try them for yourself. So we don't have more slides actually in this talk. We are going to just demo how you can write your own extension, install it, and deploy it on Docker Desktop, and what's the development process for your custom extensions. Okay, so let's have a look at Docker Desktop and how we can create our own extensions. So just before we actually create our extension, we've got now a build of Docker Desktop that has extensions enabled here. We have this extension section and we can click on add extensions. So we can see we've got a bunch of extensions available with different variety of tools that you can install just by clicking the install button. But here we're going to focus on creating our own extensions. So the first thing you can do is click on this Learn How link so that you get access to the Extension Sdk documentation. And this gives you basically all the resources that you need to learn how to write extensions, learn how to install them in Docker Desktop, and how to test them. So we're going to go through the entire process. And the first thing you see here is, so we've got an introduction about extensions, and you've got some prerequisites so that you can, you need to install a specific CLI to be able to deploy your extension locally on your machine and test them. So here you've got the documentation about how to install this CLI. It's available on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And so I've got it installed already on my machine, and I can type docker extension ls. So this CLI gives you the extension keyword and then all the subcommands that go below docker extension. So here I can see I've got no extension installed on my machine. And if we go back to the documentation here, we can see, so we've got this introduction, we've got a bunch of tutorials available. We're going to go through the first one here. And you also have a documentation about design guidelines, extension concepts, and we are going to see this later on as well, all the APIs that you can use in your extension code. So maybe let's have a look at the how to create our first extension, and I can let you, Felipe, go through this maybe.
Sure. Thank you, Guillaume. Well, so as Guillaume said, we have everything in the documentation, and we're going to go through this first tutorial. So to create your first extension, you don't necessarily need to start from scratch. You can use the Docker extension init command to generate a set of files that will be the foundation of your extension. So let's open a terminal and let's type Docker extension init and the name of the folder. So now at this point, you will be prompted with just a few questions about the information of the extension. For instance, the hub repository, so we're going to set it to Docker from extension. The description, we're going to just press enter to use the default suggested values from the CLI. So my auto Docker extension, the vendor, and the extension SDK version as well. So at this point, the CLI is generating a bunch of files. The first line that we see here is that we're creating a Git repository. So we're having this new folder with a Git repository tab. We also see some logs about Go, because this extension is creating a Go application and a React application. So two things going on. And in this last part of here, we see some logs from NPM. So we're installing some packages as part of the React application.
So maybe just to understand a bit more what an extension is and to understand the details of what code is generated here. An extension really is a Docker image that includes all the resources that the extension needs and that will be installed at the right place with Docker Desktop when you install the extension. So here, this essentially will generate code that allow you to rebuild your Docker image for the extension. And this Docker image will include a UI part for the UI section of the extension, and in this case, a backend part. But this section, these UI or backend part are not mandatory. So depending on the use cases, you might have extensions that have only some UI or some UI plus backend, etc. So let's get into the details of what has been generated.
Yeah, so we see now we have a folder here called DockerCon extension. So we're gonna go into this folder, and then we're gonna open this with Visual Studio Code. And just notice here that we have this Git repo that we have mentioned before also set up. So now we're gonna see a particular folder structure here. On top, we have a UI folder which corresponds to the React application. So if you are a front-end developer, this would be quite familiar to you if you develop React applications, where you have your package.json and some app.js file here, which is a very simple file where what we are making here is having a button that when we click on it, we're going to make an HTTP request to the backend service, as you can see here. And where is this backend service? Is in this other folder called VM. This is a Go HTTP server. This file, the only thing that it does is starting up an HTTP server, listening on a socket, and then exposing an endpoint called /hello. And this endpoint is going to return a JSON object where this message and the value is hello. So it's a very simple endpoint that we are going to make available. It's going to run as a container inside the Docker Desktop VM, and the front end is going to call this service. So it's a very simple scenario here. So we're going to open a terminal, and we're going to start building this extension. We provide a makefile, which is a few targets to make it easy for you to build this extension. So we can just type make build dash extension, and it's going to start running this Docker build command. So it's just a normal image, as Guillaume has mentioned. And let's have a look at the Docker file. So this is the image that we are building. It may look a bit large at the beginning, but it's actually very, very simple. We have a 3 multi-stage Docker file where we have a first stage, which is the builder stage, that takes care of building the backend service, which is all this part of here. Then we have another stage, which is the client builder, which is going to build just the React application, and it's going to generate those assets. And finally, we have a very lightweight image, Alpine, which is going to copy from those 2 stages the things that they need. We need the backend service that we have run, that we have built, and also the front-end assets like the index, HTML page, CSS, JavaScript, all the stuff that the React application has generated. And then finally, we are going to use this command to run the backend service as a container, and we're going to pass the socket path, which is where this backend is going to be listening on. As Guillaume mentioned, this is just optional. So there could be situations where you won't need at all to have a backend service. So you won't need to have like this stage, and of course, this main.go file here. So it's going to actually depend on the needs of your extension.
So maybe if we have a look at the last lines, we have the copy for the backend service, and we also have a copy metadata.json. And so these are resources that are specific to the extension. Can we have a look at the metadata.json file?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So this is a specific file for the extension, yeah.
So effectively, each extension must have one of these metadata JSON file, and this really specifies the structure of your extension, if it has a VM section part, so the backend, or if it has a UI part, or if you have some things that you need to deploy to the host. And also additional things like, does the extension have an icon, and what is the icon that you want to display in the UI?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if your extension needs a backend service, then you would define this VM section here, but if not, you won't have. And then the UI part is where we can specify inside Docker Desktop the title of the tab. that you want to have, and also what's going to be the entry point for your front end, right? So when we run the npm run build, this command here in the Docker file, this is going to generate an index.html. So we need to specify inside the container where the file is, and this is how we specify through the root and source properties.
Okay, so now we've built the extension. Can we try to install it?
Yeah, just before we install it, I would like to mention these labels. We have a set of labels that have been already populated from the CLI, like the title, description, the vendor, and the SDK version. But we also have another bunch of labels that you're going to show later on, Guillaume, where the user can actually provide more information. And when a person clicks on the extension in Docker Desktop, we can see, for example, screenshots or detailed description or the URL of your website and things like that. So all that information is collected in the documentation, and under the extensions dropdown, we can see here labels, and you have also examples, and have a look how you can populate this information accordingly. So now let's just install the extension, right? We have built it. We have seen the result of this build, which is this image. So we just can run Docker extension install and then the name of the extension.
So this is really the name of the image that has been built. And when you install an extension, what you specify as a parameter is the name of an image. It can be latest or it can be a specific tag.
Yeah,
but
it could be any.
It has to be
tag.
yeah, it has to be a Docker image here that contains all the resources for the extension.
Then in the log, we can see that a few things have happened. Here it says VM service started, which is the backend service that we have defined that go with HTTP server. And we also see extension UI tab added. Okay, so let's go into Docker Desktop, and then we can see a new tab has been added with the name Docker Con Extension. This name is the one that we have defined the label before. So if we click on this, what we are seeing now is the React application that we have built before that display this button called backend. So if we click on this button, what's happening behind the scenes is that we're making an HTTP request to that Go HTTP server and getting this response back. So at this point, you can say, okay, let's have a look at that container, right? We have a container running, but if you have a look at this, we don't see that container running. This is another one that I have locally. So if you want to see the containers that we have running from extensions, then you have to go into the extensions preferences and click on this Show Docker Extension System Containers. When we click on it and we just go back, then we see now that we have the backend container. So this is the Go application that is running here. And as any normal container, you can go in, exec into it, stop it, or do whatever you want.
Okay, so actually this is the backend is running as a container, and when I install the extension, it will start the Docker Compose file that specify what is my backend section for the extension, and it will start this container, which is hidden by default. But if you go to the settings, you can show your extension backend containers, and then you can view the logs, etc. Okay, that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. We can see here some logs from that extension container. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to make a change in the code. So for instance, we can go into the Go code and change the message and say, hello, Docker 22, save this file, and also make a change in the UI. We can go into the app.js and imagine that we want to show a toast notification in the UI. So we can go into the documentation, into the UI API section, dashboard, and then we can display a toast message of type success. So we're going to just copy this code here and put it just after that we have made that call to the backend. And then we're going to display a success. Then we're going to build extension again. This is going to take now a bit of time. Okay, and we're gonna install it again. But for that, we have a specific command, because if we try to install the extension again, it's gonna fail because it's gonna tell us that it's already installed. So we are gonna use the Docker extension update command, which is a very convenient command to remove the existing extension and install this new one again. So when now we go into Docker Desktop and click on the extension, if we press the button call backend, then we can see this change. So we have all the auto completion as well displayed here. So if you want to navigate to other parts of the UI, or if you want to do any other changes, you can just experiment and try out any more APIs.
Okay, so this is nice because this is nice because here I can see the different sections of the API. I can explore it easily, and so you can see that you can do things with Docker. You can call your extension backend with the extension part. You can interact with Docker Desktop with the toast example here. And can we check in the documentation? Does this, I suppose this corresponds to sections in the API section as well? Yeah, so effectively all the documentation has similar sections, so you can easily test things and use the autocompletion to discover a bit what's available in the API. And you can also take a look at the documentation and see the details of each section and navigate there to view what you can do with the Docker part, what you can do with the navigation or calling your extension backend, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, do you want to continue, Guillaume?
Yeah, I can continue. So that's cool. So far, we've seen that we can generate sample code for an extension that has a simple front end and back end. We've seen that we can install this extension. We can make changes to the code and redeploy them. We can test it in Docker Desktop, so that's good. And maybe if you let me share my screen, we can continue a bit. Okay, so let's have a look at how we can improve this a bit. So I've got the extension installed here. I've followed the same thing as you did, Felipe. So I've generated the extension with Docker extension Init. I haven't changed my code here. So this is the basic code that has been generated completely, and the extension is running. So if I can just click on the callback and it shows the extension message here. So you are showing that we can actually see the container if we click on this setting here. This allows us to view the extension container, and then we can look at the logs of what's happening on the server side. We haven't seen how to view the logs on the client side, so maybe we can improve this a bit, and we can use an extension command to say that we're in debug mode and we want to open the Chrome DevTools when we navigate to the extension. So I'll do this first, Docker extension dev debug, and then you specify the name of the extension that you want to go into debug mode. And this will tell Docker Desktop that when I'm opening this extension, I want to see the Chrome DevTools, and this will give me access to, so now it's opening automatically Chrome DevTools whenever I click on the extension. I can see my console logs, I can go in debug mode, I can set breakpoints, etc. So this is really useful to be a bit more productive in the UI development.
So this is exactly the same dev experience as when people are just developing React applications. They can go and inspect elements.
Exactly. What we're trying to do is really to give you the same experience as if you're developing your usual website or web application. You've got exactly the same tools as usual. You can set some breakpoints. You can put some console logs and see everything happening. You can, well, basically use the tools that you're used to in the UI world. And one thing that is lacking in this regard is that currently we've seen that when we do a change on the source code, we need to rebuild the extension image. So this can be quite painful. And in the UI world, we're all used to having hot reload on our UI application. So we can also set hot reload on the extension itself. And for this, we can use another Docker extension dev command. So before we actually do this, I need to start, I will open a new terminal and run, go to my UI section. So this is my React application. And here I will run npm start so that I can start serving the UI from a hot reload perspective. Now this is started. And now I can tell Docker Desktop that I want my extension to be loaded from this npm start and not from the static files. So for this, I will do Docker extension dev UI source to specify that for my extension, Docker extension, I want it to be loaded from localhost port 3000. And now if I go back to my Docker desktop, and when I need to just refresh this a bit. So it still opens the Chrome DevTools, but now I can see that it's loading from localhost 3000. So I've got hot reload on my application. And if I go back to here, I can change. So say I want to make a quick change on my UI. You can see this is immediately reflected in my UI. So that's cool. I can do some changes here. Changes that are visible, but also changes on the way I'm calling my extension SDK. So if we look again at this, go ahead.
At this point, it means that I don't even need to install the extension again. It means that if I only need to make changes in the UI side, I only have to enable this UI source command, and it will work without having to install the extension, right?
Exactly. So any change I'm doing here in the front-end side, I don't need to rebuild the extension image or reinstall the extension. I just change my code, save the file, and I can see the changes right away in Docker Desktop here. So that's quite cool to have a very fast
nice
iteration loop on my extension. And so of course I can do visible changes like here changing the button label, but I can also do some changes on the extension SDK I'm calling here. So we've seen previously that we've got various sections in the SDK. So here we're going Docker Desktop Client .extension to interact with our extension. We can also try to run some Docker commands, for example. So I'm going to play a bit with this and try to see the kind of things that we can do with Docker with just a simple couple of lines changes to invoke a Docker command. So we can just navigate with the autocompletion here, or we can have a look at the documentation. And here I was looking at how we can invoke so this is the Docker, documentation page for invoking Docker commands. You can list containers, you can list images, and you can also invoke specific commands. So we can create containers, or here we've got an example of calling the Docker info to gather some information from my local desktop install. And so I can comment this one here, and instead I'm going to call info, and I just want to have the return as JSON so that I can easily parse it. And on my result object, I've got a utility method parse JSON object. So depending, of course, on the kind of command that you're invoking, you might have JSON lines, or you might have JSON objects, or just some text that you need to parse yourself. So in this case, I can parse this as a JSON object, and I will have an info object as a result. And then I can display here. I'm going to display. So I can, from the info, I can extract various things. I'm going to extract the memory allocated to Docker Desktop on my machine and the number of CPUs. So here I can do this info. So you need to know the struct of your JSON, of course. On total, and then CPUs. And with just this, I can normally invoke my backend again, and here it shows that I've got this amount of memory and this number of CPUs allocated to my desktop. So yeah, this gives you an example of how easy it is to invoke some Docker commands, process the results, and just use hot reload to see the changes in your extension. You can very easily test it and see that everything is working, and just iterate on your extension quite easily.
So this is cool because I don't need to build a backend to get info from my host. Just I can do that straight away from the front end.
Yeah, so of course, depending on the use cases that you want to implement with your extension, in some cases you really need to have some code specifically running in the backend to implement a very specific logic. But you can already do quite a lot of things with just the UI and invoking some Docker commands to inspect containers or inspect images or list the images and discover what has been installed locally. So quite a lot of features can be implemented as extensions just by using some basic Docker commands to discover the containers running locally, inspecting them, and doing things with them. Indeed.
Cool. So what more things can I do with this Docker desktop client, apart from invoking Docker commands?
So, well, I guess we're not going to go into too much detail, but you can interact with the UI. So if we look at this, I can just desktop UI, and with the UI you can open some native dialog. This is useful especially when you want to open a file selector and you want the extension to propose the user to select, for example, a compose file and do something with it. You can navigate to various parts of Docker Desktop. So your extension can actually, if I go back to here, your extension can have some links that will navigate to a specific container details, for example. So you could have the extension to navigate automatically to a given container and view the logs. If I go back here, you can land on this screen and view the logs of your container. You can navigate to images, etc. So navigation to various parts of Docker Desktop. And you can also toast messages. So if you've shown this previously, Felipe, you can toast messages. So this is really the interaction with the dashboard itself today. And you can interact with your extension, and the extension can have some host part or VM part. So we've seen the VM backend. You can also have some binaries deployed by your extension on the host, and then your UI can invoke some CLI command on the host with binaries that have been deployed from the extension. And so, yeah, roughly your extension can invoke things from the Docker command, can interact with desktop UI, can invoke things on the extension itself if the extension provides either a VM backend or some binaries to be deployed on the host. And if we look at hosts, if we look at the host section here, your extension can also have a few interaction with the host, like especially opening some external link. If your extension needs to open an external browser, for example, you can do this with the API. So yeah, maybe just to recap what we've seen here, we've seen that from Docker Desktop, you've got this link here to learn more about how you can create your extensions. This gives you access to the documentation, and then in the documentation, you've got introduction, the prerequisites to install what the tools needed to create your own extension and build them and test them. So prerequisites to start the development process of an extension, and then tutorials to create different kinds of extensions. So we've seen the first tutorial, and then you got tutorial explaining more in detail what is needed in the front-end part, what is needed in the back-end part, what is needed when you want to run Docker commands. So we just had an overview of these various things. And then the API section to explain what APIs are available for your extension and how you can interact with Docker Desktop. We've seen how to modify your extension code, how to deploy it in Docker Desktop and test it. We've seen how you can access the logs on the server side, on the UI side, how you can do hot reload and debug your UI application. And maybe one last thing that you briefly mentioned, Felipe, is that looking at the Docker file, you mentioned that we had all these labels here. And these labels are more things to provide some metadata about your extension. If you want to bring your extension in the Docker marketplace, we need to know how to display your extension before people start installing it. So it has a title, it has a description, you've got a specific vendor section, and you can provide screenshots or detailed information about your extension. And this is used actually when you go to add extension here. I can see in preview mode my DockerCon extension. So because I've installed it, I can see how it looked like in the marketplace. I can see the title here. I can see the description. And if I click on the details, if I provide screenshots, etc., I will see this here. So you can iterate locally as well on these labels to see how it looks like in your Docker desktop when you want to publish your extension and bring it in the marketplace.
I think we have in the documentation a screenshot so people can see how some screenshot could look
exactly.
like.
Yeah, you're right. So if we look at extensions labels, so this is really the explanation of all these labels that you can provide and the format for them. And you can have, so basically your extension can look like these sort of things where you've got more detailed description here and screenshots of the extension itself so that people can preview how the extension will look like and what it does before they actually install it from the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is it. Did I forget something, Felipe?
I think it's quite a complete overview of how to get started building extensions. So we're looking forward to have people building extensions. And we also have a link in the marketplace on the top of it where people can just provide feedback, submit a request. So we also are looking forward for people to express their opinions as well.
Thanks. Yeah, so effectively we're eager to get some feedback on this and to get new ideas. I'm looking forward to see lots of new extensions introducing either third-party tools or community tools into Docker Desktop. Thanks everyone for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.